I'm Scott Loveridge, Director of the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. I'm your moderator today and pleased to host this webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted at the URL that's listed in the chat box within the next day or so. We've got a little poll here that you can be answering while I introduce our speakers. We encourage you to use the chat box if you've got questions, and I'll monitor that throughout the presentation and kind of remind our presenters that if they've got a question. So feel free to put in your questions as they occur to you. We've got three great speakers today. The first person is Brent Ross. He's an assistant professor of food industry management, and he focuses on improving management decision making within the context of the global agri-food system. His current research focuses on the role of entrepreneurial behavior in enhancing firm performance. Then Fabio Chaddad is assistant professor of agricultural economics at the University of Missouri. And his research is on strategy, finance, contracting, governance, and inter-firm collaboration agreements. And then finally, Miguel Gomez is assistant professor at the Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management at Cornell University. And Miguel researches food marketing and distribution. And with that, I'm going to turn it over.
All right. Thank you, Scott. And on behalf of myself and Fabio and Miguel, we want to thank you for joining us today and allowing us to share our work with you. We'd also like to take this opportunity also to thank the center and the USDA for the funding that we did receive from them, and that helps us continue to do our work in this area. This is kind of an interesting topic for the three of us. We each come from it from different respects. I focus more on entrepreneurship. Fabio comes from it from a direction of vertical integration and organizational economics, and Miguel in the marketing area. And when we met at a conference a few years ago, we got talking about some of the things that we could do together. And one of the things that we noticed in each one of our areas was the significant growth or significant growth in entrepreneurial activity, especially in the wine industry. And so as we were talking, we got more interested in this area, and as we dove into it a little farther, we kind of looked at the number of wineries in the U.S. over the and the growth in the industry, especially over the last 15 years. And what you can see here is that there's been a tremendous growth in the number of wineries, not only in the U.S., and a lot of this growth has been in the places you would expect it to be, in California, in Oregon, and in Washington, and in New York, and especially in the Finger Lakes area. But as you get a little farther into it, you see that during this time period, that now you have a situation where every state, all 50 states in the union, have at least one winery. And in particular, states like Michigan, Missouri, and places like Texas and Pennsylvania, we've seen a large increase in the number of wineries in those states. Illinois would be another one where there's been a large amount of growth. And so this really started to intrigue us about where is this, what's driving this change in this activity. And so before I go any further, what I would like to do is, if you haven't already filled out the survey on general wine perceptions of wines from the Michigan, Missouri, or Great Lake region, I would encourage you to do so. We also have a couple other polls here that I'm going to try to pull in. Let's see if I can do this. You might also take the opportunity to look at those too. after you've done the general perceptions, just to give us an indication of your experience with wines from these regions. All right. See if I can move those out of the way.
Want to show the participants the results?
Yeah, I need to broadcast that, right? Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Can everybody see those? All right, so if we look at the first survey, it looks like it's pretty even in terms of how you see the quality of Michigan, Missouri, and Great Lakes region wine in terms of being on par with well-known wine regions such as those in France, Italy, California, and Australia, or whether you view these wine products from these areas as being niche products, whether they have a distinct flavor or whether they really target a specific customer like local customers or tourist customers. Okay. And it looks like as well we have quite a bit of expertise as well joining us today. A lot of people that have had experience either visiting a winery or consuming wine from these regions. Okay. So if I can get those out of the way. One other kind of interesting note about how we got started in this area was in early of last year when we were putting together the survey for this. An article came out in the Wine Enthusiast magazine, and I'm sure some of you are probably aware with this. And it looked at undiscovered wine regions, and it rated the top 10 undiscovered wine regions in the world. And one of the things that really jumped out to me anyways, being from Michigan here, is that Michigan, and in particular the Traverse City area, which we'll talk about in a minute, was rated the number 3 in the world undiscovered wine region that consumers of wine enthusiasts should be aware of. And so some of the things, and so the question is, what's driving this? What's driving not only the supply side in the number of wineries that there are, especially in these what you might call undiscovered wine regions, and what's driving demand for wine from these areas? And so this obviously is not all-inclusive, but some of the things that we think might be driving this are things like food curiosity. And we see this not only on the beverage side, but all throughout the food industry in terms of a growing interest and a growing curiosity to try new foods and to try foods from places that we don't normally think of consuming food from or haven't tried in the past. So people are becoming more experimental in their food tastes. The other two drivers here would be in terms of the local food movement, which I'm sure you're all aware of, but also this idea of food tourism. So the idea that consumers now are actually taking vacations centered around a food experience. And so it might be coming and having a vacation in the Michigan, Traverse City area and planning to do go on some wine trails. It might be going to another region and taking a course on Spanish cuisine. And so there's much more demand for these types of experiences, and maybe this is the driver of the supply and demand characteristics of this industry. But from our standpoint, this also opens us up to a lot of opportunity in terms of regional economic development, and in particular, rural economic development. How can economic clustering, the term that Michael Porter brought into our lexicon. How can that increase rural economic development? How can individual wineries benefit from economic clustering? And so these were all aspects that really got the three of us really interested in this topic. And so what we want to present today is really two things. The first thing we want to talk about is a survey that we conducted over the past year that kind of looked at some of the management practices, some of the motivations of wineries and wine owners in particular for getting into this area. And we also tried to identify some of the challenges that these wineries are facing in being from undiscovered wine regions. And so we'll touch on some of those findings today as well, or today. And the other thing that we want to touch on is looking forward, where do we see our future work? What areas do we think we'll be pursuing in the future? And in particular, talking about a recent grant that we received from the National Institute of Food and Ag to move this research forward. And so with respect to the first study, we're going to be focusing on identifying challenges of rural wine entrepreneurs, and not only at the firm level. So what are the challenges that individual wineries face, maybe in terms of marketing or procuring grapes or whatever it might be, but what do the industries, or at the regional level, what are the regional challenges, or what are the industry level challenges that affect that are affecting wine entrepreneurs and their performance? And so as we go through this, we'll be looking at things such as the marketing practices of wineries in these regions. We'll be looking at how they procure grapes, where they procure it from. We'll be looking at some of the demographic information of the wine owners and of the wineries in these areas. And we'll also be looking at their characteristics or their motivations for collective action. So what is the level of industry participation or collective action in each of these regions, and how does it vary across our three states? And so this research is very exploratory at this stage, and based on a set of interviews that each of us did with various wine owners and wine experts in our region, and then also based on an industry survey that we did this past year. Okay. To kind of step back for just a second, in putting this together, we did some basic, or found some basic descriptive stats of wineries in each of our three areas. And so what's of interest here is in each of our three areas is the growth in the number of new ventures in Michigan, Missouri, and in New York. So in Michigan at this point, and it's actually gone up since the 2009 figure, we have roughly 100 wineries, and these wineries are ones that are bonded or licensed. In Missouri, 97 wineries in 2009, and in New York, 240 wineries. And so each one of these areas has increased or participated in that growth in the number of U.S. wineries. We can also compare other attributes as well in terms of wine volumes. Again, really the comparison for our purposes here is probably more on the Michigan, Missouri figures here, because the New York figures also include the Finger Lakes region, which we're not necessarily concerned with in this research study. But certainly we see very comparable results in terms of the number of grape growers, significantly more grape growers in Michigan and Missouri, and this likely relates to the juice industry and the tradition of Michigan in the juice industry here. So, for example, in the Concord grapes, it's traditionally been a very large part of Michigan agriculture. To give you a better idea of the specific regions that we're going to be looking at, here in Michigan, we have 4 regions that have been designated or been registered as wine appellations. 2 down in the southwest region, and 2 up in the northwest region around the Traverse City area. And so a bulk of the wineries that you're going to see here in this study are going to be from those regions, but also keep in mind that there are wineries that participated in this study that are also in other areas outside of those 4 registered appellations. And so we do have a couple wineries in the middle of the state and down more towards Jackson, and in fact there is at least 1 winery up in the Upper Peninsula area around Escanaba.
And Dan had a question about that last table on the last slide before this.
Yep. So yeah, so 172,000 tons. I guess if Miguel might jump in here in terms of bringing that out. These are numbers that we got from the Department of or the Agriculture, Trade and Tobacco and Trade Bureau.
Yes.
I think the question was,
yep.
is that a realistic number? 15 tons per acre. Is that?
No, I think this number is too high, and that may include also grape for other uses.
Okay. So yeah, we'll need to come back and look at that data just to make sure it is reflecting just wine grape production there. In terms of the Missouri wine industry, again, there is quite a bit of dispersion in terms of where the wine is grown and produced within Missouri. So we have, I believe, only one of these. I believe only the Herman appellation is a registered appellation, but there are certainly other areas within Missouri that are growing or producing wine. And within New York and Pennsylvania region, what we're really doing here is focusing on the non-Finger Lakes region. And so a lot of the respondents that you'll see in this study are focused in the Great Lakes region, but we also have respondents from, I think it's the Alexandria Bay area, as well as some of the other upstate New York areas as well. The Lake Erie region also includes the very tip of Pennsylvania right along the Great Lakes there. And so you'll also see some of the respondents are from those areas as well. So this was, the data was collected with using a joint mail survey that was conducted during May and June of last year. Focusing primarily on the wine owner, and so the responses you will see here are from wine owners and not other employees of the winery. The results here are also supported by various interviews that the investigators did with various wine owners, extension specialists, and industry experts.
Brent?
Yep.
Just to clarify, yes, the 172,000 is the amount processed by wineries in New York. So that may include grapes coming from other places.
Okay. Thanks, Miguel.
Okay.
And so when we break this down, we roughly had 86 respondents of 244 wineries that the survey was sent to. So for a rough response rate of 35% here. And this was pretty consistent across each of the three regions that we were looking at. Just to give some broad demographic information here, in terms of winery age, relatively young wineries, and as we'll see on the next slide, we'll break that down a little farther. In terms of wine production by winery, we see the more interesting figure here is to look at the median. In particular, in Missouri, there is one particularly large winery that kind of skews the mean figures. But if we look at the median figures, we can see that there's fairly comparable sizes in terms of wine production amongst the wineries. And in fact, the Missouri wineries tend to be a little bit smaller, at least in our sample. The other thing that's quite interesting and telling from this initial research anyways is the percentage of non-vinifera grapes. And so what's interesting here is that in Missouri and to some extent in New York and Pennsylvania, there's more usage of hybrid and American native grapes than in Michigan in particular, which tends to use more vinifera or traditional European style grapes like Riesling. In terms of getting back to the age of the wineries, the average age, the mean age was around 11 years for each of the regions. If we look at the distribution though, we can see that we're highly concentrated at the lower end of this spectrum, where overall 65% of the wineries that responded to this survey are 10 years or younger. Okay, in Pennsylvania, that's even larger. It's closer to 80%. Okay.
Brent, I'm not hearing you. Well, Fabio or Miguel, maybe you can talk about this while I figure out what's going on with Brent's audio.
So can you hear me?
Yes,
So should I continue as Brent tried to reconnect?
Yeah, go ahead.
The point that Brent was making is that in the three states we have, in general, on average, our wineries that responded to the survey are young, they are fairly small, and they are dealing primarily with non-vinifera grapes. So in addition to being in undiscovered or emerging wine regions, they have to face all these challenges, right? The challenges of being new, the challenge of being small, and the challenge of dealing with wine types like, for example, Norton here in Missouri, that are lesser known by the consumer. The wine consumer is more recognizes Cabernets, recognizes Pinot Noirs, recognizes Chardonnays, but not necessarily a Norton or a Chardonnay or non-vinifera grapes. So this adds up to the challenges facing these new entrants in these industries. how can I move this? Oh, okay. So, okay. In terms of, there is a slight correlation. This graph that is showing here shows the relationship between winery size in terms of cases production in the vertical axis and winery age in the horizontal axis. You can see a slight correlation between size and age of the winery, but you see some outliers. In the entrepreneurship literature, these ventures that are fairly young, but they grow very rapidly, they are known as the gazelles. So we want to understand why some wineries, like this one here that I'm trying to point, 47 years old, is fairly small, lasts about 2,000 cases, whereas you have younger wineries producing 100,000 or maybe 200,000 cases. So what leads to these gazelles, and why some wineries perhaps choose to remain small, right? Even though they are 20, 25, even 47 years old. So this is one of the puzzles we want to address in our research as we make progress. This graph shows from the winery owner manager what's the percentage of time that they spent at the winery. So we're trying to also investigate and examine if these are hobby producers or if they are in it as a major or their primary economic activity. Are you back, Brent?
I'm back now, yes. I'm on
Okay,
Scott's headset.
Take over now in terms of winery owner characteristics?
Yeah, sure.
Are you there?
Oh, hello? Can you hear me now? All right.
Yes.
And so what we're looking at here is in terms of the amount of time that the wine owner spends at the winery. And so we can see in particular here that 96% or owners are spending 96 or 76% of their time at the winery. So a very significant amount of their
I can also not hear Brent, so I'll take over again until I hear from Brent again. So you can see that the majority of the owners of these wineries that responded to the survey appear to spend a lot of their time at the winery. So we're talking about owners dedicating most of their time at the winery or conducting activities related to the winery, including the vineyard. But you can see some of the winery owners, they don't spend as much time at the winery, suggesting that they also have economic activities. In terms of motives, we asked the respondents why did they enter, and we wanted to understand the reasons. And I think the major finding here is that, yes, some of them enter because it's a business opportunity, but most of them mention other reasons, let's say non-economic reasons for entering the wine industry, including passion for food and wine and people, quality of life, hands in the dirt, community, and also some of them as a retirement strategy. So that perhaps suggests that for at least the majority of these winery, profits or growth or some economic rationale is not the main reason they enter the industry. So that also leads to interesting research issues that we will investigate in the future.
Okay, I think I'm back now. So it's in terms of the real central issue that we were looking at in this study was really to identify the challenges faced by wineries in these regions. And so the first thing we looked at was what are the challenges that owners are facing at the winery. And so the first thing that really strikes us, and the number one challenge that owners identified was the marketing issue. And this is pretty consistent across each of the three regions. The other challenge that was highly recognized by the respondents was in terms of grape production. And again, this is pretty consistent across the three regions as well. At an industry level, the challenges are somewhat the same in that marketing is seen as the number one challenge within the industry. So how do you market Missouri wine, or how do you market Michigan wine, or market wine from the Lake Erie region? In terms of other challenges that scored quite high, we have grape production again becomes a big issue, but then we also have three other challenges that crop up. Labor-related challenges, and in particular, this is a big challenge that was identified in Michigan, so whether that's related to seasonal and immigrant workers, that's a possibility. There's also, at the industry level, regulatory issues and quality issues that have been identified. And in terms of quality, what we want to try to explore later on is this in terms of the level of quality or the consistency of quality among wineries. We did, in this same survey, dive a little bit deeper into the marketing issues. And the number one marketing issue here, and this is likely related to the regulatory issues in the past slide, is the managing of distribution channels. The second challenge that really is highlighted here is in terms of pricing. And again, these three, at least in terms of the managing the distribution channels, these are pretty consistent across each of the three regions. And so in identifying these different challenges in terms of the challenges at the winery and in terms of the challenges in the industry, this led us to put together another grant proposal for the AFRI program at NIFA in terms of small and medium-sized economic prosperity. And so a lot of what I'm going to show next is research, the initial findings that we found in our initial study during the summer, but how do those relate to the work that we're currently doing now? And so to give you an idea, or kind of a broad picture of our current work, what we're trying to do is look at how do we identify the characteristics or strategies that would enable a startup winery to remain in business, but not only to remain in business, but also to grow and increase their performance. And the reason we're interested in this is because we see these wineries as vectors for new economic development, especially in their ability to develop clusters around wine, hospitality, and tourism, and especially with a focus on rural areas as well. The members of this team are the 3 investigators that are here today, but we've also partnered with extension specialists in each one of our regions and are using grad students to help us with some of the research. And so as we look at this issue of how do we identify characteristics and strategies for successful new startup wineries, we're trying to build on some literature in the entrepreneurship and marketing area that was done by Zimmerman and Zeitz. And so specifically, we're going to be looking at 4 broad characteristics of wineries and strategies for building performance in these different areas. And so at the individual level, we'll be interested in terms of the human capital of the winery, the education of the main decision makers, and the experience and skills of those main decision makers. At the network level, we'll be interested in looking at the strategies and the level of participation in inter-winery collaboration. So in terms of participating in wine trails with other wineries, but also in terms of participation with non-food wine businesses, whether it be a nature conservancy or whether it be different food businesses. So as an example, here in Michigan, one of the new entrants to the market is a wine and cheese trail here in the Lower Peninsula. Another area that we're focusing on is in terms of legitimacy, and so this is related actually to the first poll that you did when you first joined this session, in terms of how do customers and potential customers view wines from this region? How do input suppliers view wineries in these regions? Do they view or perceive wineries and wine from in these areas as legitimate products or legitimate businesses? Because this is going to have an influence on the firm's ability to procure resources that it may need going forward. So for example, how a lender, for example, views the legitimacy of a winery in Michigan or in Missouri, and how that affects the winery's ability to get a loan. Okay? And so we'll be looking at some of these legitimacy issues as well. And so each one of these areas, the network level resources, the individual level resources, and the legitimacy aspect are each going to play a role in a firm's ability or the business's ability to be able to attract resources, whether they be human resources, financial resources, or organizational resources. The other aspect that we want to look at here is in terms of entrepreneurial orientation. And so over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of interest in this idea of how do firms make and develop their strategies. And in particular, in regions in which there is a lot of change, this idea of an entrepreneurial orientation, or firms that are proactive, firms that are innovative, firms that are risk takers, as well as firms that give a lot of autonomy to their employees and that are competitively aggressive or respond quickly to changes in the behaviors of their competition. We're interested in how this type of strategy making, in terms of developing strategies that have those different types of characteristics of proactiveness, risk-taking, innovativeness, how those affect the performance of startup wineries, in particular because this type of orientation has shown to be very beneficial for especially small businesses and especially for small businesses in highly dynamic industries such as the wine industry. And so we're looking at what are those characteristics that can affect survival. So our dependent variables in terms of this study will be both survival of the businesses as well as growth of those businesses over the project period. Okay. So the first research objective of the project is then to examine the existing contractual mechanisms in buyer and supplier relationships and to help the industry develop procurement strategies that will reduce transaction costs, allow them to increase the grape and wine quality of their products, and therefore increase wine performance. So this is directly related to the grape production challenge that we identified earlier on in the webinar. And so this is where Fabio will be especially focusing much of his time. And so as we go back to the survey that was conducted during the spring and early summer, we can see that the major raw product that wineries in each of these three regions is really grapes, okay? And so wineries are 100%, or upwards of 100% of the wineries in this study at least, use grapes as an input into their wine. However, there is also a significant usage of grape juice and bulk wine, in particular from the western part of the country, California and Washington and Oregon in particular. And so in particular in New York and Pennsylvania, there are roughly 60% of the wineries in those regions use some form of grape juice. And in Michigan, there's a relatively high reliance on bulk wine. In terms of how they procure these grapes, there is a high reliance on vertical integration. And so what this essentially means is that the wineries in this study are growing their own grapes. And so there is a vineyard associated with their winery. And in particular in Michigan, of the respondents, for this initial study, 100% of the wineries that responded also grow their own grapes. It's also high in each of the other states as well. Oops. And so as we move forward here, if we look into the literature, there has been a very strong correlation between vertical integration and quality of products that are delivered. And so in our case, what we are interested in looking at is what are the determinants of vertical integration. And so what are the winery characteristics that will lead to vertical integration in terms of the experience of the wine owner and of the managers, in terms of the time commitment, in terms of perceived grape and wine quality, and also in terms of the transaction attributes, in terms of the specific assets that are going into the winemaking process, and in terms of the winery's ability and desire to collaborate with other industry partners. And so as we move forward, what we'll be trying to do is identify these characteristics and these drivers of vertical integration in terms of some more complicated econometric models. Yeah. The second area that we'll be focusing on is to really focus on that key challenge that was identified both at the winery level and at the industry level in terms of marketing and in particular in terms of distribution challenges that startup wineries are facing in their ability to access local markets. And so we can see from our study in the summer that 100% of each of the wineries that we looked at and responded to our survey, each one of them distributes their wine at the winery through a tasting room or some other type of mechanism. But what's also interesting is how after that the three regions start to vary. And so in Michigan in particular, there's also a high reliance on other distribution channels as well. And so direct shipments is a big component here. So 83% of the respondents also use direct shipments. We also had a high level of respondents also distributing through other distributors and going through restaurants and liquor stores. The same can be true a little bit with New York and Pennsylvania wineries. They also use festivals and community events to a large degree to distribute their wine. And in Missouri, those other channels seem to be less used by the wineries. In terms of volumes, in each one of the states, over 70% of the volume of wines from the wineries in our study is done through a tasting room or done through the winery itself. Other channels, in addition to farmers markets, direct shipments, festivals that were identified, were wine clubs. Now that might be similar to direct shipments. It's unclear from the results that we have. In one particular case, there is a winery that has their own retail stores that they have. So these would be stores that they've set up along major highways, so not at the winery, but other retail outlets that they've established. Other channels would also be in terms of custom wine and co-packing for other wineries as well. In terms of other marketing strategies that were identified here, especially in terms of promotion, some of the things that jump out would be the use of a website. And so each one of the wineries that responded here has a website that they use. They also rely heavily on social media such as Facebook, Twitter, or Groupon, offering price discounts as well as utilizing a customer database to keep track of customers. And so as we move forward, we are going to be looking at what are the drivers of distribution channel choice. And so we'll be looking at winery characteristics in terms of size and years in business, in terms of their marketing efforts and how they relate to their distribution choice in terms of promotion, product portfolio, as well as pricing. Looking at vertical integration and how that relates to how they decide to distribute wine, as well as looking at the coordination issues and collaboration issues that might be decided along with the distribution channel. The final objective of this study in terms of research will be looking at the interfirm collaboration and especially looking at what are the strategies that can be developed to overcome some of the challenges of collaboration. In each one of the regions that we look at here, this is not a very good depiction of wine trails in Pennsylvania, especially in the areas that we're looking at, but there are specific wine trails that have been utilized in each one of the areas. And if we look at the wineries that responded in our study, there's a high level of participation in those food and wine trails. Also a high level of participation in being a member of the wine association in their region, as well as being a member of the Chamber of Commerce. In terms of collective action strategies, we can see that wineries tend to collaborate with others in terms of promoting the wine region and in terms of sharing information and resources with other wineries. So there tends to be more collaboration on the industry level, and in terms of increasing the or in terms of promoting the entire wine industry and sharing information and resources to increase the best practices of the industry, and less collaboration on the individual practices of producing grapes, the winemaking, and marketing the wine from the individual wineries. In terms of challenges that were identified in terms of collaborating with other wineries, the big one here is in terms of a different business philosophy. So these may be things such as one winery may be wanting to sell their wine as a premium product. Other wineries focusing on low-cost strategies. So in terms of different business philosophies, focusing on the tourist market as opposed to focusing on the broader mainstream market, getting your product into retail and out of state. Other challenges that were identified were that this was just not a priority for many of the wineries, and also that the distance between wineries was a constraint as well. Other challenges were time, so lack of time in their ability to talk with other wineries and to discuss ways that they can collaborate together, and also in terms of lack of motivation of others, and in terms of not viewing other wineries within the region as equals.
Brent, can you hear me?
Yep. Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry to interrupt you, but there's a question for you in the chat area, in the chat box.
Okay.
Jeremy. So back to imports, what about collaboration with other wine producing regions, i.e. direct relationships, imports from California, even partial ownership of vineyards in other regions?
So we did not explicitly look at those issues of collaborations between wine regions. It was pretty much just focused on, and so they may have responded in that fashion, but the questions as they were proposed were, what are the challenges you face in collaborating with other wineries? And so we did not distinguish between other wineries as being other wineries within the state or outside the state.
Yeah, just to complement your answer, Brent, here in Missouri it's not very common to have these kinds of arrangements with other states, even though some wineries import grape juice and or even bulk wine from western states. One of the largest Missouri wineries, they import also from Michigan, especially vinifera grapes, and they also have vineyards in Arkansas. But that's not a very common arrangement to have long-term relationships outside state borders.
There's one case that we're aware of, and that is one winery has explicitly set up their own vineyards in another state and is procuring grapes in a high percentage of their grapes from another state, and so that might be one example that we can point to of collaboration between states in terms of their winery practices. Okay. And then finally, the extension piece of this project, since this is an integrated project with AFRI and NIFA, is that we will be conducting a series of workshops with industry participants in each one of our states and developing a set of educational materials that can be used for wineries, and specifically startup wineries in these undiscovered wine regions. And so with that, I'd like to open it up to questions, but I would like to explicitly thank the Center for the support that we have received from them, as well as from NIFA as well. So thank you very much.
And if folks could fill out the evaluation that you see there, that'd be great too, as we're waiting for questions. While we're waiting for questions, I do have one. In terms of the customers, these wine trails, what's the strategy? Are customers are they going to multiple wineries and buying a little at each place, or are they just trying to establish kind of the reputation of the region, and then the customers just come to one winery and buy, a couple cases, or, what's the customer behavior around that?
And so the work we have done hasn't necessarily focused on the customer, and actually that is going to be a major component of our next round of work, and it's very much related to the distribution channel and legitimacy work that we want to do in terms of understanding how does a customer perceive wine from these areas, and then why are they buying wine from these areas? Is it the focus on it's a niche product, and customers are coming to these regions as a tourist activity, and when they come, they do go to multiple wineries in their visit, or are they directing their attention to particular wineries in their wine consumption decisions?
Yeah, Brent, and this is Miguel. If I can complement that, because what we see is that there is great opportunities to do
wineries about their perception of what the customers are doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Fabio had answered Don South's question. I would just, invite the three presenters to, if you would like to have the center host another webinar or two as you get further into your NIFA project, we'd be happy to do that for you. So
that sounds like a great opportunity.
Yeah,
thanks, Scott.
For the information of everybody,
yeah.
We are just getting ready to go in another effort to collect more data. So we'll be collecting additional data in the 3 states starting next month. So probably next fall, Scott, will be perhaps more results to share, and then will be a good time to organize a new one, if you're interested.
Okay. And thank you for helping us fill out the webinar evaluations and the other polls that you did. Thank you for that.
Looks like Chris has a comment there.
Great, yeah, and so that's something, the comment from Chris here, looking at or discussing the customer purchasing behavior of buying bottles from multiple wineries as a result of tasting and discovering new wines. That's something certainly we want to pursue going forward, and so hopefully we can help validate that comment further and help explore how wineries might develop a strategy around that to help them improve the success and performance of their wineries. And also think about, in terms of, there's been a lot of wine trails that have been set up to kind of look to take advantage of this, but also other opportunities to link with food businesses or to nature conservancies or other non-food businesses that also might help them exploit those opportunities as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, it might be also thinking about the broader tourist package there too. I know that I'm not familiar with all the regions that you've been looking at, but I know in northern Michigan you've got the sort of the winter ski tourism going on, and you've also got the summer lake tourism going on. I know in Missouri and Herman they've got sort of a, you know, a big, you know, it's quite a historic area that people are coming to look at the history, and so there may be some complementarity there that, you know, wineries need to think about as they're developing their marketing strategy.
So I see another comment here by Jeremy in terms of estimating market demand for either wine grapes being sold to wineries from dedicated to vineyards. And so this is something that I think Fabio is going to be spending a particular focus on in terms of looking at vertical integration strategies and trying to identify the success factors in terms of, are vertically integrated wineries more successful than wineries that are dedicated solely to the winemaking process. And certainly we can incorporate that into our econometric models, obviously based on response rates and things like that.
Yeah, if I may complement your answer, Brent.
I think we'll go ahead and turn off the recording. If folks want to stay on the line and put in some more questions into the chat box, that's fine, but we're going to go ahead and turn off the recording.
So just to complement